I've had it up to here with this woman. 3 months. 3 months I've been picking up her trash from my yard. Cigarette butts, fast food wrappers, empty wine bottles. Like my property is her personal dumpster. I've asked nicely. I want a test. I've called the HOA. Nothing works. 26 years wearing the badge, upholding the law, and this is what I get in retirement. Till, not anymore. Tonight, everything changes. You see, I've been collecting every piece of garbage she's thrown onto my property. Every single scrap. And tonight, Miss Karen Wilson is going to get it all back. She thinks she can disrespect a retired police officer. She thinks the rules don't apply to her. Well, she's about to learn that some lessons come with a price. And I promise you this, Karen, you're going to regret ever throwing so much as a gum wrapper on my lawn. Before we continue, if you enjoy stories about standing up to entitled neighbors and sweet revenge, make sure to click that subscribe button. This is the best way for you to support our work. Thank you very much, and let's continue. Moving into the Oak Ridge neighborhood was supposed to be the beginning of my peaceful retirement. After 26 years on the force, the last 15 as a detective with the Chicago PD, I was ready for quiet mornings on my porch, afternoons tending to my garden, and evenings watching the sunset with a cold beer in hand. My name is Marcus Johnson, and at 53, I'd earned this slice of paradise. The 2-story colonial on Maple Street wasn't extravagant, but it was mine, paid in full with my pension and savings. Red brick exterior, white trim, and a sprawling oak tree in the front yard that provided perfect shade during hot summer days. The backyard wasn't huge, but it was enough for my grill, a small vegetable garden, and the hammock my daughter Aisha had given me as a retirement gift. "You deserve this, Dad," she had said when I first showed her the house. "After everything you've been through, you deserve some peace." Peace, that's all I wanted. After years of seeing humanity at its worst, responding to domestic disputes, gang violence, and homicides, I craved tranquility. The first week in my new home was everything I dreamed of. Neighbors stopped by with welcome baskets. I was invited to a community barbecue. The HOA president personally delivered my copy of the neighborhood guidelines with a friendly handshake. All except for the house to my right, 1284 Maple Street, owned by Karen Wilson. I first saw her 3 days after moving in. A white woman in her 40s with an immaculate blonde bob and the perpetual expression of someone who had just smelled something unpleasant. She was in her driveway, berating a landscaping crew in rapid-fire English and broken Spanish. No, I said 3 inches, not 4. Can't you understand basic measurements? Dios mío. Why is good help so impossible to find these days? I was retrieving my mail when I caught her eye. She paused, gave me a once-over, lips pursed. I nodded politely. "Good afternoon, neighbor. I'm Marcus Johnson. Just moved in next door." Her smile was thin as a paper cut. "Then, welcome to the neighborhood." Her tone suggested I was anything but welcome. She turned back to the landscapers without another word. I brushed it off. In my line of work, you develop thick skin. Not everyone's going to like you, especially when you're a black man in America. I'd faced discrimination before, subtle and overt. This was nothing new. The trouble started the very next morning. I stepped out to grab my newspaper and found an empty Starbucks cup and a candy wrapper on my lawn. Thinking it was just blown there by the wind, I picked it up and threw it away. But the next day there was a fast food bag, then cigarette butts, then a wine bottle partially hidden in my shrubs. After a week of this, I installed a small security camera pointing at my front yard. The footage confirmed my suspicions. Each morning, around 6:30 a.m., Karen would walk her poodle down the sidewalk, pausing in front of my house to accidentally drop whatever trash she was carrying. Sometimes she'd even reach into her designer purse to pull out garbage specifically to drop on my property. I decided to handle this like a mature adult. One evening, I caught her retrieving her mail and approached with a friendly smile. "Ms. Wilson, I've noticed some trash appearing on my lawn in the mornings. My security camera shows that it seems to be falling from your hands during your morning walks. I'd appreciate it if you could be more careful." Her face flushed red, but her eyes remained cold. "Are you accusing me of something, Mr. Johnson?" "Not accusing, just asking for a little neighborly courtesy. She clutched her pearls. Literally. She was wearing pearls, and she grabbed them like I'd threatened to snatch them. I don't know what you think you saw, but I assure you, I would never litter. Perhaps you should focus on maintaining your own property instead of making baseless accusations against respected community members. I have video. I don't appreciate being harassed. She cut me off. I've lived in Oak Ridge for 15 years. I'm on the HOA board. I don't need to be lectured about community standards by someone who just arrived. She stormed off before I could respond. I stood there stunned. In my career, I'd interviewed murderers who showed more respect. The next day, there were twice as many cigarette butts on my lawn. I tried a different approach. I wrote a polite note explaining that I had video evidence and would be forced to bring it to the HOA's attention if the behavior continued. I placed it in her mailbox with a plate of homemade cookies, my late wife Diane's recipe. Peace offering. The following morning, I found the unopened plate smashed on my driveway. Cookies crushed and note torn to pieces. This was when I realized I wasn't dealing with a reasonable person. Over my years in law enforcement, I'd encountered all types of people, from hardened criminals to troubled teens to corrupt officials. Karen Wilson had the entitlement of the wealthy, the vindictiveness of the insecure, and the prejudice of someone who'd never had her worldview challenged. I decided to document everything, every piece of trash, every interaction, all backed by video footage. I submitted a formal complaint to the HOA, complete with time-stamped evidence of her deliberately littering on my property over the course of 2 weeks. 3 days later, I received a response from the HOA president, Richard Bartlett. Dear Mr. Johnson, we have reviewed your complaint against Ms. Wilson and found insufficient evidence of deliberate misconduct. Oak Ridge prides itself on being a harmonious community, and we encourage neighbors to resolve minor disputes amicably without HOA intervention. We trust this matter can be settled between the parties involved. That evening, I saw Karen and Richard sharing wine on her front porch, laughing like old friends. It didn't take a detective to put those pieces together. The littering not only continued but escalated. Coffee grounds dumped in my mailbox. Dog waste appearing mysteriously in my garden beds. A half-empty bottle of nail polish remover, accidentally, spilled on my newly sealed driveway. I tried speaking with other neighbors, but the response was always the same. Awkward smiles, vague sympathy, and quick subject changes. Karen Wilson, it seemed, had the entire neighborhood under her thumb through some combination of fear, obligation, and social blackmail. After a particularly frustrating morning of cleaning up broken glass from what appeared to be a deliberately shattered wine bottle, I called my daughter. Dad, this is harassment, Aisha said, her attorney instincts kicking in. You should file a police report, maybe even get a restraining order. And say what? That my neighbor is dropping trash in my yard? That an HOA board member has it out for me? You know how this goes, Aisha. They'll take one look at me, one look at her, and decide this is a civil matter not worth their time. So what are you going to do? Just let her keep disrespecting you and your property. I sighed, feeling the weight of decades fighting systems designed to protect people like Karen while dismissing people like me. I don't know yet, but I'll handle it. That night, sitting on my back porch with a glass of bourbon, watching fireflies dance across my yard, an idea began to form. Not as a police officer bound by regulations and procedures, but as a man who'd finally had enough. I remembered an old case from my early days on the force, a dispute between neighbors that had escalated to property damage. One neighbor had been dumping yard waste over the fence into the other's garden. After months of failed resolution attempts, the victim had collected all the yard waste and returned it, by spreading it across the offender's front porch while they were away for the weekend. When they returned to the rotting mess, they never dumped anything over the fence again. Sometimes, people only understand consequences when they experience them firsthand. The next morning, instead of throwing away Karen's trash, I began collecting it. Every cigarette butt, every coffee cup, every food wrapper went into a large plastic bin in my garage. I bought a doorbell camera with better night vision and adjusted my existing security cameras for maximum coverage. For 3 weeks, I maintained this routine. Pick up trash added to the bin documented all. At the same time, I observed Karen's schedule. She left for her Pilates class every Tuesday and Thursday at 9 a.m., returning at 11:30. She attended church on Sundays from 8 a.m. to noon, and every third Saturday of the month. She hosted her book club from 3 p.m. to approximately 7 p.m. As a detective, I'd learned the value of patience and observation. You don't rush a stakeout, and you don't act without sufficient intelligence. So I waited, collected, and planned. By the time the bin was full, it contained 3 weeks' worth of Karen's discarded trash, food wrappers with traces of rotting residue, leaking liquid from various bottles, cigarette butts soaked in rainwater, and even some of her dog's waste that she'd flung onto my lawn after our confrontation. I knew which night I'd make my move. Karen's social media, sent to public. Ironically enough for someone so concerned with privacy and property, showed she had tickets to a charity gala in the city. She'd been posting about it for weeks, bragging about her $500 per plate donation and the designer dress she'd purchased for the occasion. The night arrived. From my window, I watched her leave in a sleek black Tesla at precisely 6:45 p.m. According to the event schedule she'd shared online, the gala would run until midnight, with an after-party for select guests continuing until 2 a.m. Karen had commented that she wouldn't miss the after-party for the world. I waited until 1 a.m. The neighborhood was quiet, most houses dark except for the occasional porch light. I put on dark clothing, not to be stereotypical but to be practical. I pulled on gloves, not just for fingerprints, but because what I was about to handle was genuinely disgusting. With one final check of the street, I carried my bin of collected refuse around the side of my house, through the gap in our fencing, and into Karen's immaculately landscaped backyard. Her garden was a showcase of wealth and precision. Imported Japanese maple trees, a koi pond with underwater lighting, stone pathways winding between beds of exotic flowers that probably required special care and chemicals to survive in our climate. A wrought iron table and chairs sat on a paved patio space, and nearby stood a custom outdoor kitchen that looked like it had never actually been used for cooking. I began my work methodically. This wasn't about rage or revenge. It was about justice and consequences. I scattered the cigarette butts among her pristine flower beds. I emptied coffee cups into her koi pond. I placed fast food wrappers under decorative rocks, just visible enough to be noticed. I hung empty plastic bottles from the branches of her prized maple trees. I emptied the rest of the rotting garbage around the base of her expensive outdoor kitchen. The piece de resistance was the specially collected dog waste, which I carefully arranged on the seat cushions of her patio furniture, not directly on the fabric, but wrapped in her own discarded napkins. Plausible deniability was key. The entire operation took less than 15 minutes. When I finished, Karen's showplace garden looked like it had been hit by a particularly selective tornado that only carried garbage. I stepped back to survey my work, feeling not triumph, but a quiet sense of restored balance. As I slipped back through the fence gap, I heard a car approaching and quickly moved into the shadows of my own yard. Karen's Tesla pulled into her driveway. She emerged in a glittering gown, high heels in hand rather than on feet, looking exhausted but pleased with herself. She didn't even glance toward the backyard as she entered her house through the front door. I slept soundly that night for the first time in weeks. The scream woke me at precisely 7:23 a.m. according to my bedside clock. It was the kind of scream that starts high and tight before expanding into full-throated outrage. I calmly made my coffee and waited. The pounding on my door began at 7:36 a.m. I opened it to find Karen, still in her bathrobe, hair uncombed, face flushed with anger and smeared with yesterday's makeup. "Yo!" she shrieked, jabbing a finger toward my chest. "You did this. You vandalized my property." I took a slow sip of my coffee. "Good morning, Ms. Wilson." "Did what, exactly?" "Don't play innocent with me. My garden is destroyed. There's trash everywhere. My koi fish are dead." That last part genuinely surprised me. I hadn't intended to harm any living creatures. "I'm sorry to hear about your fish, but I don't know what you're talking about." "Liar." Her voice had reached a pitch that probably only dogs could fully appreciate. You put garbage all over my yard. This is criminal trespassing and vandalism. I'm calling the police." Several neighbors had emerged from their homes, watching the spectacle from a safe distance. "Ms. Wilson," I said calmly, "are you accusing me of putting trash in your yard? That's a serious allegation. Do you have any evidence?" "I don't need evidence. Who else would do something so disgusting?" I raised an eyebrow. "Interesting. When I approached you with video evidence of you repeatedly dumping trash on my property, you dismissed it as baseless accusations. But now you feel comfortable accusing me without any proof whatsoever." She sputtered, momentarily derailed. That was different. "How so? Because I'm black and you're white? Because you're on the HOA board and I'm just the new neighbor? Please, explain the difference to me." The gathering crowd shifted uncomfortably. Someone coughed. "I'm calling the police," she repeated, though with less conviction. "Please do," I replied. "I'm sure they'd be interested in reviewing all the security footage I've collected over the past months, including the footage from last night, which shows me at home all evening." This was a calculated risk. My cameras were positioned to capture my front yard and entryways, not to provide me with an alibi. But Karen didn't know that. You couldn't have been home," she stammered. "You must have snuck out another way. That's quite an imagination you have. While you're sharing these theories with the police, I'll be sure to provide them with all my documentation of your campaign of harassment, including—" I pulled out my phone, scrolling through photos. "This image of you deliberately pouring what appears to be nail polish remover on my driveway last Tuesday at 6:42 a.m. She paled beneath her blotchy anger. "You've been stalking me? Collecting evidence isn't stalking, Ms. Wilson. It's what responsible citizens do when faced with persistent harassment. Now, would you like to continue this conversation in front of all our neighbors? Or would you prefer to discuss a more neighborly path forward?" The crowd had grown. Richard Bartlett from the HOA had appeared, along with his wife. The young couple from across the street were recording discreetly on their phones. The retired teacher from the corner house was frowning disapprovingly at Karen, not at me. Karen sensed the shift in the atmosphere. For perhaps the first time in her life, she wasn't controlling the narrative. "This isn't over," she hissed, before turning and storming back to her house, tightening her bathrobe around her with as much dignity as she could muster. Richard approached me cautiously. "Marcus, is there something going on between you two that the HOA should address?" I met his gaze steadily. "Funny you should ask, Richard. I submitted detailed documentation weeks ago about Ms. Wilson's ongoing harassment. You found the evidence insufficient at the time. I wonder if the fact that you and Ms. Wilson are such close friends influenced that assessment." He had the grace to look embarrassed. "Perhaps we should revisit the complaint in light of new perspectives. I think that would be appropriate, and I think it would be appropriate for you to recuse yourself from the process, given your personal relationship with Ms. Wilson." The teacher from the corner, Mrs. Gladwell, I'd learned her name was, stepped forward. "I'll make sure the complaint is reviewed fairly this time, Marcus. I've been on the HOA board for 20 years, longer than either Karen or Richard. And between us," she lowered her voice, "she's had complaints filed against her before, always dismissed. Somehow, the crowd dispersed, but not before several neighbors nodded to me in newfound respect. It wasn't about the presumed pettiness of returning garbage. It was about standing up to a bully who'd been terrorizing the neighborhood for years. By afternoon, news had spread throughout Oak Ridge. Karen's garden disaster had been seen by several neighbors who'd been called over by her screams. Cell phone photos circulated. Accounts were conflicting. Some said it looked like raccoons had gotten into her trash and gone on a rampage. Others swore it was targeted vandalism. No police ever came to my door. I later learned that Karen had indeed called them. But when they suggested filing a formal report, taking statements from neighbors, and reviewing available security footage, she suddenly decided it wasn't worth wasting the city's resources over some trash. 3 days later, I received a letter from the HOA. It stated that my complaint against Karen Wilson had been reviewed by a special committee, excluding Richard Bartlett, and found to have merit. She was being issued a formal warning and a $500 fine for repeated violations of the neighborhood covenants regarding property respect and waste disposal. The letter included a handwritten note from Mrs. Gladwell. Justice moves slowly, but it does move. Welcome to Oak Ridge, Detective Johnson. That evening, as I sat on my front porch enjoying the sunset, Karen's Tesla pulled into her driveway. She got out, saw me, and froze. For a moment, I thought she might march over to resume hostilities. Instead, she gave me a curt nod, grabbed her shopping bags, and hurried inside. The next morning, no trash appeared on my lawn, nor the next day or the day after that. A week later, a landscaping crew arrived at Karen's house. They worked for 2 days straight, removing dead koi, draining and cleaning the pond, replanting flower beds, and pressure washing her patio furniture. I watched from my window as Karen supervised, noticeably avoiding even glancing in the direction of my house. Life in Oak Ridge settled into the peaceful routine I'd originally hoped for. Neighbors stopped by more frequently, often with questions about home security or advice on dealing with minor disputes. I became the unofficial neighborhood mediator, drawing on my decades of experience defusing tense situations. Karen and I established an unspoken truce. She no longer littered on my property or made snide comments when we crossed paths. I no longer documented her every move or kept a bin of rotting trash in my garage. We weren't friends, would never be friends, but we had reached a state of cold civility. 3 months after the incident, as it came to be known in neighborhood lore, I was raking leaves in my front yard when Karen's Tesla pulled up. She remained in the car for several minutes, visibly steeling herself, before emerging and walking stiffly to where I stood. "Mr. Johnson," she said, her voice tight but controlled, "I wanted to inform you that I'll be moving at the end of the month. I've accepted a job offer in Phoenix." I leaned on my rake. "I appreciate you letting me know. I wish you well in Arizona." She nodded, eyes fixed somewhere over my shoulder. "There's something else." She took a deep breath. "I want to apologize for my behavior when you first moved in. It was unacceptable." The apology was clearly painful for her, like passing a kidney stone made of pride. "May I ask what prompted this apology?" I asked carefully. She finally met my eyes. "My therapist suggested it would be healthy." Another deep breath. "And my daughter refused to visit me here again after she heard how I'd been treating you. She called me a Karen, which is my actual name, so that was particularly humiliating." I nodded, suppressing the smile that threatened to emerge. "Apology accepted, Ms. Wilson. Self-reflection is difficult, but worthwhile." "Yes, Will." She adjusted her purse strap nervously. "That's all I wanted to say." As she turned to leave, I called after her. "Ms. Wilson." She paused. "I'm sorry about your koi fish. That was never my intention." She stiffened, then gave a single sharp nod without turning around. We both knew what I had just admitted, and what she had just acknowledged. An understanding had been reached. Karen Wilson moved out on schedule. The for sale sign remained in her front yard for only 2 weeks before being replaced with sold. The new owners were a young interracial couple with twin toddlers. They brought me homemade banana bread the day they moved in, and I helped them assemble a swing set in their backyard the following weekend. Sometimes, justice comes through official channels, courts, police reports, formal complaints. And sometimes, justice requires taking matters into your own hands, using the tools and knowledge at your disposal. As a police officer, I had always worked within the system. As a black man in America, I had learned that sometimes the system doesn't work for people like me. I never told anyone the full truth about that night, not even my daughter Aisha, though her knowing smirk when she helped me install security lights suggested she had her suspicions. The neighbors developed their own theories, most involving raccoons or teenage pranksters or divine intervention. Mrs. Gladwell from the corner house brought me a peach cobbler a month after Karen left. As we sat on my porch enjoying it with coffee, she said casually, "You know, Marcus, in all my years in this neighborhood, I've never seen raccoons organize garbage quite so deliberately, almost as if someone was sending a message." I took a bite of cobbler and smiled. "Nature is full of mysteries, Mrs. Gladwell." She laughed. A bright sound in the quiet afternoon. That it is, detective. That it is. I finally had the peaceful retirement I'd dreamed of. My garden flourished. I joined the neighborhood watch and the HOA landscaping committee. I hosted monthly barbecues that became a community fixture. And if neighbors noticed that my security cameras were still meticulously maintained, no one mentioned it. Some lessons, after all, are worth remembering. Justice delayed isn't always justice denied. Sometimes it's just being prepared for the right moment. And sometimes, the most effective consequence for thoughtless behavior is to experience exactly what you've inflicted on others. Every action has consequences. Karen learned hers, and I found my peace, not by turning the other cheek, but by holding a mirror up to show the ugliness of prejudice and entitlement. It wasn't revenge, it was education. And sometimes, that's the most powerful form of justice there is.